I'm Jenna Gibson.
And I'm Lydia Gibson.
And we're from Student Media, and we're going to ask some questions that have been sent in. How have the survivors you interviewed reacted to your novel?
So the survivors that I interviewed, they all spoke Lithuanian. And when I went to Lithuania, I thought I spoke Lithuanian. And so I started speaking Lithuanian with them, and they said, "What language are you speaking?" I said, "I'm speaking Lithuanian. What language are you speaking?" And they told me, "Honey, you speak a ghetto Detroit Lithuanian. You sound like a rapper. Don't speak." And so I became completely inhibited to speak Lithuanian. But because of that, and because the book was published, in English, I didn't know if these survivors would ever know that the book was even published. But then a Lithuanian publisher, Alma Litera, decided to publish the book, and it became a bestseller in Lithuania. And now these people recognize their experience, the experience of the girl who jumps down off the train car and finds her father, and her father gives, the wedding band. The book Dombian's son, they ate a dead owl. Like, these are their stories, and so now they know that the world knows their story.
What has surprised you the most about being a best-selling novelist?
What has surprised me the most is how much time I spend touring and how little time I spend writing. I had this romantic notion that being a novelist meant that I would be cozied up either in some quaint, coffee shop with a cup of tea or coffee, and that I would be writing and the muse would be, floating around. Oh my gosh, I am like in a window seat, Southwest Airlines, on a deadline, choking on peanuts with a baby next to me screaming. It's not as romantic as I thought, only because I'm touring so much. But then the other thing that surprised me, I have social anxiety, I guess you would call it. I think that's why that's why I was an awful performer, number one. That's why I became an artist manager, because you're behind the scenes. And it's absolutely why I became a writer, because I'm so frightened to tell people how I really feel, so instead I'm going to write it. And imagine the fear when my publisher's like, "Great, awesome, now we're putting you on tour." And I'm standing behind that curtain, you feel like, oh my gosh, my knees are shaking, and it's really terrifying. And people say, "You get over it, you get over it." My gosh, I haven't. I'm sweating like a pig. I'm so terrified. So that's also the shock, the biggest surprise. Like and one student said, "So are you an entertainer or are you a writer?" These days, I don't know, I don't know.
Do you believe that there are aspects of the Lithuanian culture that made people strong enough to survive the Soviet deportations?
That's a really interesting question, and I don't necessarily believe that it applies only to the Lithuanian culture. I think it applies to Lithuanians, Latvians, Estonians, Polish people, Hungarian people, Czech, these people who experienced the horror of occupation and being stripped of their dignity and trying to take them, their identity from them. The country evolved in a really unique way. The first thing that Stalin did was to take all the men and separate them from the women. This was his plan for genocide. The men were sent to gulags, the women and children were sent to Siberia. So when you separate the men and the women, there won't be any more children, the country's done, the end. But he underestimated, the human spirit. However, what does happen to a country when you lose an entire generation of your best men? All the intelligentsia, all of the scholars, the athletes, the journalists, the musicians. When that entire part of the population is murdered, what happens? And the maternal spirit of these countries is really strong. And that's not an accident. This is what happened. And people say, wow, the president of Lithuania is a woman. The minister of defense is a woman. The minister of finance is a woman. It's not, the country is still recovering. Lithuania regained their independence in 1990. Prior to that, I told the students today, When they competed in the Olympics, they walked under the Soviet flag. They had to give their medals to the Soviet Union. When you see Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia in the Olympics carrying their own flag, their freedom is fragile and they're learning to live within it. So I don't necessarily think it was just the Lithuanian culture. It is the human spirit, that when someone says, I'm going to take this from you, that you say, no, I won't allow it. There's that internal spirit that they told us about.
I know you've been a great inspiration to everyone here, so what are your advice for people who want to start writing?
Okay, advice for people who want to start writing. Get your heart broken, be completely humiliated, embarrassed, shamed. Even though these are really painful experiences, they really will help you as a writer. Failure is the best preparation for success. And I have failed so many times, and I mean failed big, like big, big, big. I was invited to a communications class this morning, and thank you so much for inviting me, because I really don't get invited to communications classes often, but I told the class that in the music experience I had an experience where the vice president of a record company told me that he liked my artist and really wanted to work with me, but he didn't like my face. And would I consider doing something about that? And because he said, if you we're in LA and Mexico's really close and you can go and get plastic surgery, he would enjoy working with me if I changed my face. And although that was horrific at the time and shocking, let me tell you now, when I read a bad review of my work, it's like, oh yeah, okay, whatever. It really, so best preparation is failure. But from a literary standpoint, you've got to read. Good writers are good readers. The next thing is, let someone else read your work. It's terrifying. But I've been in a writing group for 10 years. They read my work first, before my agent, before my editor. And if 5 people read your work, and all 5 say, chapter 4 is a little slow, there's something to that. And that's really helpful. So, get your heart broken, meaning meet your emotional truth. That's what I'm really saying. Really, really come to grips with some emotional truth. Read, let someone read, your writing. And do not worry if you struggle with grammar, or there are editors that will help you with that, for sure. I meet people and they're like, oh man, I'm really bad at English. Yeah, so was I. I was a finance major.
Why do you believe that American history books have largely ignored Stalin's genocide?
There are all sorts of theories about this, and when I go to events, there are some groups that have conspiracy theories, that are, Washington D.C. hid this story, and I've met with, as I've spoken at European Parliament, I've been to D.C., I've met with the administration, and I asked, did you know what Stalin was doing? Did you know? And they said, yes, we did. But they didn't try to hide it. They said, Ruta, after the war, everything was in such a shambles. We had to restore the spirit of the country. We had to come back from the war. And the biggest problem came at the post-war conferences of Yalta. And if you're going to place blame and say, why didn't the world know about this? At the post-war conference of Yalta, Stalin convinced the United States and England to allow these countries to remain under his control when they were dividing up the post-war countries. And that is what is called the Great Betrayal. And there isn't much attention drawn to that. I'm really hoping we can draw more attention to it. But now it's not even to place blame. The survivors themselves, they don't want blame. They just want people to know the story.
Does anyone in the audience have questions?
Someone asked questions. Oh, good. Yes.
You mentioned your father, and you mentioned that he was placed on the tour and conference with you. How did he respond, and does he continue to respond to this book?
For those of you who didn't hear the question is about my father. How did he respond, and how does he continue to respond to this book? Thank you for asking this question. When I told my father that I was going to write this book, he was terrified and said, do you really think that you should be doing this? Russia surrounds Lithuania, you know, like a bear at a campsite. Are you sure you should do this? And he was concerned about repercussions and also concerned, would anyone be interested? But the turning point came when foreign countries started to buy the book. Because then it just wasn't an American voice trying to get attention. It was a world voice. One book, many voices. And he comes with me. My dad is nearly 80 years old, and he shares his story. And so he's so incredibly supportive. Out of the 45 countries that the book is published in, it's not published in Russia or the Ukraine. And I'm hopeful that one day that it will be.
Any other questions? Yes? Do you think that your novel will open Lithuania up to developing more literature as they're working to develop their culture? Maybe not just your novel, but I know that literature is so important in developing culture. Do you think that Lithuania will get there?
Lithuania is already there. The question, for those of you who didn't hear it, is, she asked, do I think that perhaps my novel might help Lithuania in developing their culture, in moving forward, opening the door to bring more literature to help the development of their independence. And Lithuania already has a tremendous amount of great literature on this subject. The survivors, some of the survivors themselves have written memoirs, have bravely written memoirs. They're all in Lithuanian. The Lithuanians were so protective of their language. When the Soviets came and said, you're going to speak Russian now, you're not going to speak language, there was this underground movement to retain their language. So as a result, those survivors who experienced it, many of them don't, most of them don't speak English. So the next step for me would be to get some of those memoirs and the literature that already exists, that was written and hidden underground, in jars beneath the earth. They were so terrified that this story would be lost. They wrote books, but they buried them in jars and in coffee cans. They threw them into the sea, hoping that the stories would float to other countries. So now, if we can get translators to translate the story, that's the story that's important, the real story. And those are the stories that should represent Lithuania and Latvia and Estonia. And Lithuanians, because they lost their voice, they're amazing artists, they're amazing dancers, amazing musicians. And so I'm really hoping, yes, to bring these stories out of the dark. And there's a movement, a younger, oh my gosh, can you believe I'm including myself in that category? The younger people, that we are trying to bring this history to the forefront. And that's why when I was interviewing the movie directors and producers for the film, there were amazing directors and producers that wanted to make this movie. And when I said, so, tell me about your location, they're like, I have an amazing location in Colorado. No. And I found an amazing Hollywood director that is of Lithuanian descent. And it's going to be an American-European co-production. So there are a group of us. We began something that's called the Lithuanian World Arts Council. And we are trying to preserve and share literature and art, because you're right, it is the soul of a nation. Okay, other questions? Yeah?
You reference the art of Edward Munch in your story. How come you decided to do that? And what did it happen?
I love you for asking this. Thank you. As a writer, you put these things in the book, and it means something to you, and you wonder, like, is this just like, no one's gonna get, no one's gonna get this. And it's very rare that I get this question. And the reason I did, well, number one, because Lithuania, they told their story through art. They couldn't share it. They would be arrested and deported. So they drew and they painted. And Munch, this artist, this Scandinavian artist, he wrote on themes of death and loss and suffering and love. And those themes echo the themes of the novel. And I have woven the titles of 23 Munch paintings into the text of Between Shades of Grey. And there was one student in the Czech Republic that found them, who I was like, wow, So that's why I chose him, and there have been some art exhibits where people were showing the different paintings of Munch relative to the narrative, and I also really admire him as a painting. And as a novelist, we do, it's an indulgence if you really like something, to weave it into a book, or if you really don't like someone, to weave it into the book too. So thank you so much for asking that. Any other questions? Yes?
You mentioned the book not being published in Russia or Ukraine. Have you talked to any Russians concerning the events in the book? I would presume there would be, among especially educated people, a sense of national guilt.
This is, again, I'm so grateful that you asked this question, because what's important to remember is out of the 20 million, this figure, it's estimated that Stalin killed 20 million people, the majority of those were the Russians themselves. Russia and the Ukraine suffered more than anyone during this part of history. This is also their story. And there was a publishing company that approached my publisher that wanted to publish the book in Russia, and I was so excited. And so I contacted the Lithuanian ambassador to the United States, and I said, we have an offer. And he said, who is it from? I gave him the name. He said, Ruta, that's Putin's publishing company. And I said, ah. So instead, what we've decided to do is, to your point, there are a group of people in Russia that very much want this story to be told. And they have an organization called Memorial. And they are dedicated to preserving and sharing this part of history about these atrocities. And I think the plan currently is we are going to license them the text for $1. And Memorial will translate and publish this, and to raise money for their organization. And I won't take any royalties, they will take the money to spread this. And I have, through PEN in New York, PEN Writers Organization, I have met with Russian academics and historians. And we have the most meaningful and rich conversations. And that's the dialogue I want. To me, there is no line in the sand. It's not, black or white. It's when you peel back the layers, the truth is between shades of gray, and that's why I titled the book that. And when we start that conversation with Russia, that gray, I really, really think that is going to be progress. And I absolutely believe in it. People tell me you're crazy, it's never going to happen. I think it's going to happen one day. I think it's going to happen, so thank you.
Last question.
Sorry, in the very back, because in the back we didn't take a question. Yeah.
I know the Soviet Union was staunchly very much against religion. How is the suppression fake the shape of the Lithuanian people, and is it affected by that?
This is a great question, and he's absolutely right. During the Soviet occupation, religion and faith, they not only took their language and took their flag and took the name of their country off the map, they took their churches, and in the church where my father was baptized, it became a museum of atheism. And the church where my grandmother was baptized was made a weapons storehouse. And what happened was that, again, when people try to take something away from you, there was a quiet resistance in Lithuania. And that quiet resistance led them to their independence, to actually regaining their freedom. And the way Lithuania regained their freedom is so important. It was called the Baltic Way. And these Lithuanians, Latvians, and Estonians, when the Soviet Union tried to take their faith, they wouldn't allow it. And they said, not only are you not going to do that, we are going to break this cycle of hate and aggression. That endless cycle, answering pain by inflicting pain. These people said, we're not going to do that. We're going to break the cycle. And so they used silence, not violence, to regain their independence. They used prayer. And in August of 1989, on the 50-year anniversary of when the pact was signed that gave these Baltic countries to the Soviet Union, millions of people walked to the street and joined hands in silent prayer from Lithuania all the way up into Latvia, all the way up into Estonia. They joined hands and they said, we are ready, we are free, we have always been free. And the news networks started picking up on this human chain of people stretching miles and miles and miles across 3 countries. And that's when the world started to take notice. And the first country that came forward with their support was Iceland. And they said, Lithuania, we recognize your independence. And then Portugal came forward and said, the Baltic Way, this is the way to freedom, through peace. And then, one by one, all the countries, including the United States, made their declaration. Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, you are free. And so I think that's a beautiful last question. I'm so grateful, and please look it up. You know, the Baltic Way. It's really, really a profound experience. Again, you guys, thank you so much. I am here. I am signing books. And if you bought a book and you read it and you don't know what to do with it, please donate it to a school or a library, or if you know someone that doesn't have money for a book, buy a book for them. Again, not because I wrote it, but because I'd love to share this history. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.